Before I get going, I just want to see where the students are. Could you raise your hands for me? Great. Nice. Can I get one of you students to volunteer to help me?
Scott?
Come on up. So I've got a cold, and typically what I do, and see this doctor's orders right here. Thanks, Robert. If you answer a question, you get some candy. And you're the candy man today, okay?
Sounds good.
So I don't want to get my germs on the candy, so would you put it all in the bowl, and if someone answers a question, you go see him, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So really what I wanted to do today was just give you like a 30,000 foot level of what restoration is, because restoration is a very broad topic. And you know, a lot of what we talk about in Robert's class are more of the native re-veg projects. But man, what we've done in Silver Bow County, it's over, you know, we've done dozens of projects over 20 years, and we've spent over $100 million. And I just wanted to just kind of give you a broad brush overview of those projects. So go ahead. So you've all probably heard this before, but I just wanted to touch on the background. These are all from lawsuits, and you know what remediation is, and basically it's what the EPA and Montana Department of Environmental Quality do, and that's to clean up the environment, to protect public health and the environment. And this is one that a lot of people forget about too, but it's to comply with environmental standards. So in Butte, you know, the ultimate goal is to meet water quality standards. We only want clean water leaving this valley, so that's a very high goal. And you don't hear a lot about that. We hear about protecting human health and the environment, but we also, the goal of remediation is also to meet environmental standards. And although response actions can, but they don't necessarily restore the environment to its pre-injured condition. And the other arm of CERCLA, does anybody know what CERCLA stands for? Come on, students. Anybody? What's that acronym stand for?
No, I'm not allowed. I teach it every day.
Okay, do you want some candy though?
I do.
All right, what does it stand for?
Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act.
Correct. So that's why we call it CERCLA, because nobody can say that. Yeah. Get some good stuff there, Dr. A. Okay, and the other arm, I mean, we're all familiar with this, but the other arm is restoration. And restoration, basically we're taking actions on injured natural resources, and we're going to get into what the resources are. But there are really 4 types of actions under restoration. Restore, and we're trying to restore that injured resource back to its baseline condition. Very lofty goal. Have you looked in the Berkeley pit? Anybody? Okay, they all get some candy. They answered the question. Okay.
We were there last week.
Okay, that's pretty tough to get that back to baseline, isn't it? Yeah, so can anybody name another restoration action? Anybody? Besides restore? Replace. Okay, there it is. Tom, get some candy right here. Okay. Okay, so replace, what does replacement mean? Does anybody know what replacement means? What does this really mean?
It means put something that wasn't there before. It's great. It's a different use.
So let's say Silver Bow Creek is injured, and that used to be a fishery, but we can tell people, hey, why don't you go fish in Browns Gulch, because we're going to do some projects in Browns Gulch. So that's a replacement for fixing Silver Bow Creek, and we've done several replacement jobs. And up above that, rehabilitate. Can anybody tell me what rehabilitation would mean? Another use, what does that mean? Anybody? Anybody? Go ahead.
Like the golf course, Anaconda.
Yeah, it's to give it another beneficial use. So if you had, say, a pine forest that was injured, and you really couldn't bring it back to being a pine forest, but instead you brought it back to a grassland that would provide habitat for wintering range for elk, that's a rehabilitation. You're not bringing it back to the original use, but you have a different use for it. And the last one is acquire. And one of the biggest projects that we had for acquisitions, and this is, okay, you're not going to restore this land, but you're going to acquire the equivalent somewhere else. And that was the spotted dog. Does anybody know where the spotted dog is? Okay, it's Gary.
Oh, it's up by Garrison.
Right, it's between Deer Lodge and Garrison. It's a wildlife management area that was bought with restoration funds by, it was initiated by the trustee, which is Governor Schweitzer, and it was, you know, a pretty big area that was purchased to replace the injured terrestrial habitat and the wildlife that was injured by smelter smoke, basically. So that's the two different funds, or two different arms of CERCLA or Superfund. Okay, what are damages? Can anybody read that for me? Somebody, a student, come on, somebody. Thank you, thank you. Okay, what restoration is the cost to restore injured natural resources or their habitats. And also compensable, this is where you form your claim, is what is the cost to compensate the public for the lost use of those resources. So nobody's fished in Silverbow Creek or caught any fish out of Silverbow Creek, let's say, for 120 years. So that has some value, because normally we could do that if the resource wasn't injured. So part of a claim is to compensate the public for their lost use or lost enjoyment of that natural resource. Or a lost service. So we have a big, huge groundwater claim. What is a service that groundwater provides us?
Drinking water.
Drinking water, thank you. Prop man, candy man, come on. Drinking water, okay, interesting. Okay, so the damages that are recovered in a lawsuit must be used to do those things that we just talked about. Restore or replace the injured natural resource. We can't go off and build a big hotel and casino. This ain't New Jersey, so we can't do that, or Louisiana. We have to actually try and restore the injured resource that was the subject of the lawsuit. Okay, so what are natural resources? You guys can read that. It should be pretty obvious. But these are things that are controlled by the state of Montana and held in trust for the people of Montana. Okay, and the services are the physical or biological functions performed by the resource, and that's part of it is the human enjoyment of that resource. So these are the resources that were injured by basically mining and smelting in the Butte and Anaconda area. Did anybody add another one? Water, fish, wildlife. People? People were injured. Land.
Vegetation.
Okay, these are some of the services, right? How many of these have you seen floating down Silverbow Creek before? Not too many, right? There we go. Something interesting is that, you know, they say that basically what Horseshoe Bend, the water treatment plant that treats the water from not only the Berkeley pit, but also the Horseshoe Bend area, which is underneath, what comes out underneath the Yankee Doodle tailings impoundment, is about 7 million gallons a day. Butte consumes about 7 million gallons a day. And if we were in Missoula, we could drill a well and pump out 7 million gallons a day to supply our people. But can we do that here? No, okay? So that's part of this big claim. So these are the injuries. We just talked about groundwater. Besides Butte and Anaconda, there was an area over by Milltown. The aquatic injuries to Silverbow and the Clark Fork River, riparian areas. And of course, those riparian areas are home to fish, insects, and we also have sediments in the stream that are important to those aquatic life. And then the terrestrial injury. What is a terrestrial injury? Can anybody help me? Anybody? Anybody? You guys have been in this class for how many months now? Come on, what's a terrestrial injury? Daniel, help me out, come on.
Tailings inhibiting plant growth or something like
There you go, thank you.
that. I've had enough.
There you go. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, and this is the area of the claim. And you guys have all seen this map before. We're starting up here in Butte, and it's basically this white area is the whole upper Clark Fork River basin. Okay, and that's the area that was the subject of the lawsuit. And here's just a summary of the lawsuits and the settlements. So in 1999, the state received $144 million. And that was, this is for the damages. Remember we talked about what the damages were? And it cost Montana $15 million to pursue that lawsuit. And ARCO had to reimburse those costs. And then also, they got about $2 million worth of property along Silverbow Creek. And this was the big one, the cash out for the remedy of Silverbow Creek. And that was the Streamside Tailings Operable Unit. And so the total was about $230 million, and that was 6 of the 9 claims in the upper Clark Fork. And then the second settlement came in 2008, and that was for these areas, the Clark Fork River, cash out, the uplands or around Smelter Hill, and Butte Area 1, and that was the alluvial aquifer. And Butte Area 1 is basically the riparian area of the upper Silverbow Creek, starting at Texas Avenue and going all the way down to where Silverbow Creek exits Summit Valley at the I-90 bridge. So that second settlement was about $169 million. Okay, and now that we've got this money, the law says you have to make a plan how you're going to use that money. You can't just build a casino. So there are a couple different, there's a big process that has to be taken, and this process takes years. And the first part of it is to make a process plan. Does anybody know what a process plan is? There you go. It's Candyman. That's right. This is exactly, it's, you got to decide who your planning entities are. And the trustee of our natural resources for Montana, the governor of the state gets to decide who the trustee is for these resources. And in 1999, when this settlement came out, it was Governor Roscoe, and he declared that the governor should be the trustee of our natural resources. And the other planning entities, he chose a trustee restoration council, and the people that sit on that council are the governor's chief of staff, the attorney general, and the heads of several of the natural resource departments, which are the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, and also the head of the local restoration council. And we have 2 different councils. There's the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Advisory Council, and there are 2 members on that. It's a citizen council because the governor wanted citizens to have a say in how these funds are spent. So on that Upper Clark Fork Council, there's 2 from Butte, 2 from Anaconda, 1 from Peaburg, 1 from Deer Lodge, 1 from Ovando, and 1 from the Missoula area. And then there are a couple other folks, 1 member from the tribes and 1 member from the Grant Coors Ranch are also on that. And then the local restoration council for the Butte Area 1 settlement, that's 9 citizens right from Butte. 3 of those were appointed by the governor and 6 were chosen by the local government. So those are the planning entities. Those are the people that basically are going to drive this process. And another entity is also the Natural Resource Damage Program. And what they come up with is this, they say, what are we going to do? How are we going to chunk this out? So they come up with the phases and the scheduling for the process plan. And then a big part of this to remember is that these are public resources, so the public has to have some say in this process. So you have to involve the public. And then the next big part of a process plan is what criteria are you going to use to make your decisions? And there's typically two types of criteria. There's legal criteria. Those are found in Superfund. Prop man, would you come up here? You can leave the candy there. Oh, you better guard it. No, bring it with you. Don't leave it by Mark. Okay.
Hand those out.
Yeah, let's see. So if you're really curious as to what the legal criteria are, I'm just going to have, what's your name?
Scott.
I'm going to have Scott just pass this around, just that one right there. Just thumb through it, just take a look at legal criteria. If you're not interested and you just want candy, don't even worry about that. Okay, and then policy criteria. And what policy criteria are criteria that the local public council thinks up. And for Butte Area 1, one of them is our local council wanted to not fund any projects that were normal government function. So what does that mean? What is normal government function? Well, the government typically would put in storm sewer systems, right? So they would put the pipes under the street that collect runoff from your yard, okay? So that's a normal government function. So what this Restoration Council wanted to make sure of is that they weren't spending restoration funds on something that the government normally does. So there's a list of those as well. There's about 8 of those. And then administration. And of course, administration is, you know, budgeting, paying the bills, putting together meetings. And then also part of that is how is this council going to vote on these projects? They have to have a procedure, and typically they follow Robert's Rules of Order. And then once you've got your process plan put together, then you really start to look at your restoration plan. And the restoration plan, you have to categorize all the different topics we've looked at and then consider a bunch of different alternatives and weigh those alternatives against your criteria and then rank them. So like this is our highest ranking project, and then it's this one, this one, this one. And then typically you pick those off until you run out of money. And the plan is spend the money because it was the subject of a lawsuit. We're trying to restore a resource and we don't want to hang on to that money forever. We're trying to spend it. So the interesting thing though about, you know, once you've got the plan, then the council, well, the NRD advises the council advises the local council, and then the local council then advises the trustees council, and the trustees council advises the trustee, who is the governor. So ultimately, you've got these different steps, and the last decision maker is the governor. So he decides this project goes or it doesn't. And typically he is in all along those steps. There's only been a few cases where if the local council liked it, the governor would typically go along. There's only a couple cases where that didn't happen. Okay, now when Montana got that original settlement in 1999, it couldn't spend the principal from that lawsuit until we came up with the restoration plan. But because this is such a big basin, it took several years to come up with that plan because we had to assess all the injuries, make a bunch of different alternatives, and it took basically almost 10 years to come up with the plan. But we wanted to start spending this money to restore those natural resources while we were waiting to come up with that plan. And what the law allows you to do is to spend the interest. And so the Montana Natural Resource Damage Program ran a grants program off the interest for 10 years. And basically it was, we funded 73 large projects for $120 million. Did anybody write down what the original settlement was for? How much?
230?
And that was including the cash out. So really, in 10 years, this lawsuit or this fund basically doubled its money. So that's something that you all should keep in mind. If you invest your money, okay, instead of buying a new car and a new cell phone and a new car and a new cell phone, and you earn interest, okay? So these are the, I'm just going to click through these real fast. Pick your favorite county, and I'm going to tell you how many projects were implemented in that county for how much money. All right, and typically what we did is, like we said, we'd solicit the entire basin. We'd get ideas from all kinds of different groups and we would evaluate those projects, then we would rank them, and then we'd take that information to the council, and they would rank them, and then we'd start funding those projects. So a lot of work got done while we were waiting to come up with the restoration plan. So now I want to focus just on those ones that happened in Silver County. Can somebody tell me, there's how many counties in Montana?
56.
Okay. How does Silver County rank among those 56 for size? Last. We are the smallest county in the state. Who answered that question? This guy right here. Give him some candy. Come on. So it's kind of tough to see on this, and I could not find a good image of Silver County on the internet. Okay. But this is our boundary, Silver County. Okay, and here we are, Butte. And it's pretty interesting that most of Silver County, the boundary, follows what? Does anybody know? What does that boundary follow?
That's the big hole.
Okay. A lot of it is the Continental Divide. Okay, so water inside of here is flowing basically down the Clark Fork. But what happens right here? Here's the Highlands. Okay, and then we have this little Butte sticking out here. What is that? Does anybody know?
Jefferson River Pyramid.
All right, this is the Silver County has never had enough water for all its people. And so what they did here is they put this little Butte, they drew the county line over to the Jefferson River, so if the need be, we could get water from the Jefferson River. Okay, who knows the name of the little town down here in this corner of Silver County? Waterloo. How fitting is that, huh? Okay. So really the thing to keep in mind here is Butte and Silver County has never had enough water to fulfill its needs. So these are the grants projects that have taken place in Silver County, and you're going to notice one theme here. Most of it's water. And these numbers are from the end of the last fiscal year, so they're 9 months old now. Did you pick your favorite one? Anybody? Candyman, Scott, what's your favorite project up there?
Spent a lot of time down at Big Wall and Thompson Park, so.
Well, have some candy. He just answered a question. Good job, Scott. Okay. Oh, Big Hole Pump Station. There you go. All right. So I want to focus on this category, groundwater replacement. Does anybody know where the Butte Water Company building is?
Granite Street.
Yeah, almost across the street from the courthouse. Yep. Nice, handsome building, isn't it? Okay, and here, I think a lot of people don't know, but Butte City Water was originally started by Copper King William Clark. And the reason he started it was to supply water to his smelter in Meterville. So if you know where Meterville is, it's basically you took Park Street and kept going east across the Berkeley Pit, you'd end up in Meterville. Okay, so he had a smelter way up high in the system, and you need water to process your ore. He didn't have enough, so what Clark did is he came down here to the confluence of Blacktail Deer Creek. We always leave Deer off, don't we? And this is Silverbow Creek here. So he drilled a dozen wells, and they were all under artesian pressure, so the water actually flowed up out of the pipe, and then he just dug a sump, and that water flowed into that sump, and then he pumped it up, and then Montana Street would be about right here. You can see the Butte Reduction Works is here. So Montana Street would be about right here. Oh yeah, it actually says there. So because Clark used city streets to convey his water, the city said, hey, we want some of your water. So this little facility right here actually served as the public water for our town. And there it is right there. This is an 1890s map. In about 1890, Clark decided to buy the Butte Reduction Works, and he pretty much abandoned his smelter in Meterville. But there was still another company that had 2 smelters in Meterville, and that was the Butte and Boston and Montana. So they decided, hey, we're going to buy City Water Works because Clark now has his facility here and he has enough water. So A.G. Bigelow, who was the head of that corporation, bought City Water. Well, guess what happened about 2 or 3 years later? Does anybody know why that guy's there? It died. Right. This was the old water quality test. You put the goldfish in the water. If it lives, you can drink it. If it dies, it ain't very good. Don't drink it. So, and goldfish are much more sensitive than people are to metals. But in 1893, the city of Butte filed a suit against Butte City Water, which was a privately held company. In the end, A.G. Bigelow takes his smelter and moves to Great Falls. Does anybody know the name of the smelter in Great Falls that he built? Black Eagle, thank you. More candy. More candy. Okay. But in the meantime, what did he do? He had to supply water to the people of Butte still. And that's basically what facilitated the construction of the Basin Creek Reservoir in that system. So here is the Butte water system, and we're way out here. Basin Creek's down here at the end. And we also had to bring in water from where? Scott? The Big Hole, yes, thank you. Yep. There is a diversion dam that takes water out of the Big Hole River, puts it in a pump station, and there's 22 miles of pipe from the Big Hole to Butte. And about 20 years ago, they had to build a treatment facility for that water, and it's at Feely. And so that water comes in this way, okay, and it goes to the Colorado Hill tank, and that distribution tank pumps water all the way up to about Daly Street. But if there's a resident above Daly Street, they can't get water from the Big Hole. They get water from the Molten. And the Molten Reservoir, has anybody been to the Molten? Okay. Were you fishing or were you what? Drinking beer? Daniel, come on. Skiing, okay, good one, Joe. Yeah, right. Okay, and the other system is the Basin Creek. So we're basically taking water from 3 different areas. And one of the big projects that we've done with restoration funds is to build a Basin Creek water treatment plant. It's a long story. That water was fairly pristine when you look at the Highland Mountains. A lot of the water that flows to the Basin Creek Reservoir comes from the Highlands. So we're at the top of the watershed. We have really good water. But about 10 years ago, Butte lost, or the Basin Creek Reservoir lost its filtration waiver. And basically it was one of only 2 sources in Montana that the water was pure enough they didn't have to filter it. They could just put chlorine in it, send it to town. Well, after the pine beetle kill incident, you know, you look around all our entire area and lots of pine beetles, and those trees, when they died, they dropped their needles on the forest floor. As snow melts, it picks up carbon from those dead pine needles and dead trees, and now the water has high organic dissolved carbon. And when you mix chlorine with dissolved organic carbon, they form a disinfection byproduct. and many of those are carcinogenic. So the Montana Department of Environmental Quality yanked Butte Silver Bow's filtration waiver for Basin Creek, meaning that they had to now build a treatment plant. And that treatment plant, if you've ever gone out to the reservoir, you see this baby along the way now. That's a $30 million facility, very high-tech, ceramic filtration. It's about the only one in America that uses that system. And the one thing that they designed into this, I'm just going to back up. Basin Creek is a gravity feed system. That water treatment area, or that water system, the reservoir, is higher than in elevation than Butte. So it can basically gravity feed water about all the way up to Front Street. So everybody on the flat was drinking Basin Creek water. And the beauty about Basin Creek is that being a gravity system, and it's actually, because of the reservoir, it's pretty pure. A lot of the sediments, a lot of the gunk drops out in the reservoir, and it's pretty easy to treat. Whereas the big hole, Scott, what happens to the big hole every spring? Yeah, and it starts getting a lot of color to it, so they have to put in a lot of chemicals to treat that water, plus they got to pump it 22 miles to Butte. So it costs a lot more to treat big hole water than it does Basin Creek water. So that's our, Basin Creek's probably our cheapest and our best source of water. So Butte Water, to their credit, devised a system to keep the water going through this plant as gravity, and it still can make it to Front Street under gravity. So that was an engineering feat. And the other thing they did is, since this is the lowest cost and the best water, they actually built this little pump house on a place called Waterline Road. Go figure. Does anybody know where Waterline Road is? Has anybody ever been to Lydia's? Yeah, Waterline Road's right there. Okay, so this dude now is just a block away from Lydia's. But what this plant does is, here's Waterline Road, so this little pump station can take that water and pump it all the way over here now to the Colorado Hill tank, which you could probably see out this window. And so now people all the way up to Walkerville can get Basin Creek water. It's the best and it's the lowest cost. So pretty good job by Butte Silver Bow to pull that off. Very good investment. So another program that we're really going to make a push at is water meters. When NRD started working with Butte Water, less than half the customers were on a meter. And why is metering important? Anybody? A student, come on. Why would a water meter be important? What's the alternative to a water meter? Flat rate, you bet. Give yourself some candy, Scott. Attaboy. Okay, so why would this utility want people on meters?
It discourages overuse, like excessive.
Right, wasting, exactly. And another benefit, can somebody help me out? What would be another benefit? It encourages conservation, but what else?
You could track water usage.
Exactly. So all the water meters that are put in now have a radio read system. So basically, this little dude is sending out a signal to Butte Water, and they can know real time how much water you're using. So if you have a leak, they're going to know it. And they can call you and say, hey, your toilet's running, or you know, something's going on at your house, so go fix the leak. So that's a pretty good conservation tool. I'm sorry?
Do they actually make those calls?
Oh, you bet. Yep. Yep. So right now, part of our program with Butte Silver Bow is that any flat rate customer that wants a meter, they'll put it in free of charge, and then they send the bill to us. So I think there's typically about 12,000 to 13,000 customers on the system. When we started, there were less than 6,000 meters on the system, and now there's probably over 9,000. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but the goal is to eventually get everybody metered. The bad news for metering is, though, that once they get most of the people on meters, they're going to have to restructure their rates, because right now meters are actually cheaper. There's a ceiling volume, and if you stay under that ceiling, you're only paying about 30 bucks a month. But if you're on a flat rate, it's about 50 some bucks a month. But eventually, if we go to all meters, you can see there's a difference there. People are going to be paying 20 bucks less a month, and eventually they're going to have to say, you know, we got to bring in as much money as we're spending. So they're going to have to redo their rate structure. So aquatics projects. So in the life cycle of a fish, where do they start? What do they start in? They start as their little eggs in their redds. Help me out, Abby. Then what do they do, Abby?
They become
Alien.
Okay. So basically, as they get bigger, they move out into bigger water. Okay, so they go from these small tributaries out into the main stems, but then where do they go to spawn? Back up to the tribs. So you can see this cycle here. Tributaries, main stem, tributaries, main stem. And really one of the big problems with the Clark Fork River system is no longer connected through irrigation diversions. It's typically agriculture is kind of messed up that connection. So does anybody know what Syntopke is? I'm not talking to Seafoot people. Put your hand down. Salish Kootenai. Okay. And what does it mean? Yeah. This valley, the place name for this valley that the native peoples gave it was Syntopke, which basically meant the place where you shoot them in the head. Because we had big fish in small streams, so the harvesting was fairly easy. So what kind of fish were the native trout here? Come on, Evan, help me out.
Bull trout.
Bull trout, what else?
Cutthroat.
Cutthroat, okay. Yep. So during their spawning season, they'd come up the tribs. There they were, easy to harvest, okay? So does anybody know what a cutthroat looks like? Yeah, probably. When did cutthroat spawn?
Spring.
Yeah, I showed you right there, didn't I? Got a little happy with the clicker. What about bull trout? Fall, okay. So they probably made, the native peoples probably made 2 trips here. In the spring to harvest cutthroat, in the fall to harvest bull trout. So there's what a cutthroat looks like. A pretty, I guess, exotic fish. That's a really good looking fish.
Why is it called a cutthroat?
That little red slit right there. Okay, what was the other species of trout? Okay, bull trout get a lot bigger than cutthroats, don't they? Yeah, check out that dude. So could you imagine that guy swimming in our creek? Yeah. Pretty amazing, huh? So you can tell why this was a special place. Okay, and really what we had to do then is we had to assess this whole system, and the guys from FWP did that for us. So they went out and looked in all the tributaries to see, you know, what the needs were of those tributaries, what was the habitat like, what was the water quality like, was there enough water, was there connection to the main stem. So that was part of that bigger lawsuit. Remember when we made the process plan, we had to have some assessment work? Well, that was the assessment for the aquatic resources. And in our county, these monies were, allocated to our streams. And this $250,000, of course, Silverbow Creek was cleaned up under streamside tailings, but they also got $250,000, and that was basically for a fish barrier at the outlet of Durant Canyon. And why would we put a fish barrier there? Does anybody know? Outlet of Durant Canyon. Well, the thinking was that, so rainbow trout are not native to Montana, but they spawn the same time as a cutthroat, and they're close enough relatives that they can hybridize. And actually, Silverbow Creek has the potential to become a very good cutthroat stream. So if FWP didn't want the potential for rainbows to come up into Silverbow Creek and crossbreed with the cutthroat. So they put that big, it looks like a dam there at the outlet of Durant Canyon.
It's also downstream of German Gulch.
Correct, and German Gulch is the stream that's supplying most of the cutthroat back to the main stem.
Didn't it cost more than, it was like $1 million or $2 million?
No, it was
wasn't
about 250.
Is that all it was?
Yeah.
It's a big structure.
That's all we paid for. Blacktail Creek, and of course that's the stream that starts out in the highlands. There's $1 million to do restoration projects there. This is a new one, and Scott, would you pass this one around too? This is the new revised restoration plan for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. And we're trying to keep that an evergreen document. Things change, so about every 2-3 years we go back and reevaluate things. And this one just came out, and that talks about all the streams and the terrestrial projects as well. So Basin Creek, this is new. When monies for the Basin Creek Water Treatment Plant, 20 million came out of the Upper Clark Fork, and 10 million came out of the Butte Area 1 settlement. Because you know, the city water was right there in Butte Area 1. However, the local council didn't want to spend anything on water system, but the local government convinced them, hey, we need this $10 million to finish that plant, but if you finish that plant, we will let you come out and fish in the Basin Creek Reservoir. So part of the assessment was to have FWP go out there and look at that fishery, and guess what? Basin Creek has native cutthroat trout in it, and guess what? They're big. So this is going to be a wonderful fishery for the people of Butte, which was always off limits because they didn't filter the water, so what they had to do is restrict access so people couldn't mess it up. So for decades, nobody's been allowed to go up to Basin Creek Reservoir. But now because there's a filtration plant, they've lifted the restriction, and we're working on a project, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Browns Gulch, does anybody know where Browns Gulch comes in to Silverbow Creek?
Ramsey.
Ramsey, yep, just downstream of Ramsey. Okay, and German Gulch comes out into Silverbow Creek in Durant Canyon. So, but anyway, I'm sorry. The purpose of that $300,000 for Basin Creek was to, right now, once fish get into the reservoir, they can't get back up to the spawning ground. So we're going to eliminate those aquatic passage issues with that money right there. So, and here's another, just an example of one of the little projects we did on Blacktail Creek. This is the Redfern diversion, where Highway 2 and Continental Drive come together. There's a gentleman there that has a certified hayfield, and he gets water out of the creek from this system. Now that looks pretty friendly, fish friendly, right? So if you're trying to get upstream, can you get over this? Can you get around it? No. So basically he would dam up the creek, and you can't see it very well here, but there's a PVC pipe, water goes in there, and then he brings it out of the creek and into a ditch, and he waters his hayfield. So the project that we did here is basically, here is what they call a Coanda screen, and underneath that is just basically a screen, and it's pointing downstream, so the water comes over it and continually keeps it clean. Then the water drops into a pipe underneath the screen and then goes to his field. But you can see we built these, nice little step pulls, so a fish can get up here, 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 and get over it and get back up into the headwaters to spawn. And this is the same deal, but here you can see he's basically got a valve box where he can open that to get water out of the creek and send it to his field. So that's just one example of the aquatics projects that we're working on. 9 Mile? This is right at 9 Mile, yep. And the one thing interesting about that project is Blacktail Creek is what they call a mapped floodplain. So if you do any work in that floodplain, you have to show that you're not going to increase the rise, the water level, and you have to go through a FEMA permitting process. This project actually cost $30-some thousand, but to get our FEMA permits, it was like $60,000. So anything we do on Blacktail Creek downstream of the 9 Mile, we have to go through that process. So that really does eat up into your restoration funds. So 2 weeks ago you heard Jim talk about the Parrot Removal. Again, this is just Civic Center, and these are the tailings, and this is the struggling Silverboat Creek trying to get through there on its way down to Missoula. And of course you guys all saw this. This was the reason we're doing it. This contaminated alluvial groundwater eventually gets down to the creek. And if you eliminate the source, hopefully the system cleans up, and you know, everybody says, well, is it years or is it geologic time? It's somewhere in between. We don't know. But we do know that if we don't take it out, it is contaminated for geologic time. And there's some of the big yellow machines. Okay, reeve edge projects. You guys should all be familiar with these, right? So these are like right here on the Butte Hills. So if Butte Area 1 was a groundwater claim and a surface water claim, why are we doing reeve edge projects on the Butte Hill?
Contaminants blow off.
Who said that? Oh, Scott, have some candy. Yes, you're right. Yep. So these projects have to be tied back to the source of the lawsuit. The lawsuit here was for injuries to groundwater and surface water. So if we can prevent sediment off the hill, contaminated sediments, from getting to the creek, that's legit. We can spend money on that. And I'm just going to click through these, pick out your favorite one. Norm, some of your work. Norm, some of your work. This is some of Malloy's work up on the top of the hill by the Granite Mountain Memorial. Norm, do you recognize this one? Okay, good. Oop, sorry. Robert, you know that stuff, right? Have any of his students actually been down here? Is he photoshopping this stuff, or is he really doing this? Okay.
Show you how old it is.
Okay. Okay. Here he's actually getting some work out of some students. That's good, right? And this is actually a community planting from 2017, right, Robert? This is around the Missoula ball fields. Yeah. So these are all your neighbors putting plants in the ground around an old mine dump. And this is a project that Robert's working on now. It's high-tech stuff. So, yeah, this is what the future holds for the program. Does anybody know where that one is? Yeah, that's the casino by Walmart. Yeah. Okay. This is a fun one. Everybody likes these projects because they get to enjoy them. Does anybody know what this is?
Greenway.
That's the Greenway, yep. On that slide, the Greenway received over $23.5 million. About half of it was for the recreation components, the trail and the trail system. The other half was additional tailings removals and ecological components along Silverboat Creek during the cleanup. Skyline Park, does anybody know where that is? Behind NCAT over there by Hillcrest, Children's Fishing Pond, yep. It was about a 50-50 project, $2.5 million, and half of it came from NRD, the other half was county. Thompson Park, another $2 million project, about half of it came from NRD. Has anybody been out there? Any Falfers? No Falfers in the group? Take it easy on that knee, Evan. No, okay. How about Big Butte? Are you all aware that Big Butte is now a public open space purchased with natural resource damage funds? This is 350 acres that now belong to you. And this is the trail system. There's the Big M. Joe left a beer can down here about
I'm
a
not
week.
there. I'm over here.
Yeah. So if you're stressed out, take a walk on your trails now.
You're missing some trails too. The new
Yeah,
trails
there's
that
all
were
the
put
new
in.
Ah,
There's a whole bunch of
yeah,
new
that's
trails
true.
put
This
in
is
with
an
skills
older,
zones.
this one's an older one.
And then the skills park, yeah.
Yep. And this is the one we're working on right now, the Basin Creek Reservoir project. If you're familiar with Basin Creek, here's the park down below. This is the dam, and we hope to have fishing access all the way around the reservoir, basically, and a trail system. It's a complicated project because there's not only Butte Silver Bow owns the riparian areas, and that's kind of this lighter area, but all these darker green areas, that's U.S. Forest Service, and under their rules, this is still a restricted area. So it's going to be tough to work everybody together and get this on the ground. And the area is not open yet, but we hope 2-3 years, we hope to open it up a little bit at a time. One thing I think a lot of folks don't know is that there's a second reservoir. The upper reservoir is up here. And really a lot of the spawning habitat is right between the two reservoirs. But once a fish is in here, in this big water, they can't get back up. And there's a fish barrier right here. It's an old sediment trap that the water company had, and that's what that $300,000 is for, is to eliminate that. And then we also have to do some infrastructure protection around the dam. So it'll be a couple years, but this is going to be a wonderful gem right in your backyard. We're also working on a project up at Moulton, much smaller, but kind of the same thing, walking trails around the reservoir and fishing access. Okay, Butte Area 1 small projects. In the Butte settlement, the local council wanted to hear from the public, and they got 100 ideas, but we had to finish the plan. So the Governor Schweitzer, who put these people on the council, they wanted to honor him and get their plan out before he left office, so they didn't have time to look at all 100 of these ideas from the public. So they came up with, set aside $1 million in their plan to fund these citizen-sponsored projects. And this one is one I'm not sure you're familiar with, but this is the Grove Gulch watershed, and it's a feasibility study to what to do with the water coming from Grove Gulch into Blacktail. And this is Raja Nagaseti is doing this project for us. Robert tells me he's building a tree greenhouse somewhere on campus. Have you, anybody seen it? No, we're just kidding. Yeah, so that's his stuff.
That's the frame of it.
Yeah. And so that's a small project, $100,000 greenhouse. So it's actually more than that, but Tech put up the match for actually erecting the building and providing the land and the foundation and the utilities. Here's another one, these storm drain markers. And it basically says only rain in the drain. And these are all around Uptown now. There's a young girl who was 15 at the time, and she and the governor actually put this marker down together. And this is up on the corner of Broadway and Washington. And the one thing that I always see on almost every storm drain uptown is cigarette butts. Guess where they end up? Yeah. And then the last part we basically fund is, we've talked about aquatics, terrestrial, groundwater, recreation, and also education. So is anybody here from the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program or worked with them? Anybody? Anybody? Anybody?
We work with them.
Yeah, okay. Give yourself some candy. Scott, help them out. Okay.
We're good. We're so much keen.
Okay. So this figure is a year old, but there's been about $4.7 million has gone into this effort. And one other effort that, this is a small project, and it was the folks from the science mine wanted to come up with these little exhibits that they could help kids understand what Superfund was all about. And that project was funded. And this is just one of them, acid mine drainage. And they've got, Fred, how many exhibits are there?
There could be 6.
6. Okay. And so that's by the folks from the science mine. So,
Anybody here from the science mine?
anybody? Anybody? Anybody here from the science mine? Has anybody been to the science mine?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Has the science mine come to you yet?
Yeah.
We're working on that, aren't we, Fred?
It's a lot
Okay.
of fun. You can spend an hour playing in the mud.
Okay.
It's really good.
Yep. All right, so really that's about it. So, since we have some rabbits, okay.